Reproductive cloning, one of the controversial topics discussed nowadays. Is it a religious sin, a medical breakthrough, or the next superweapon to destroy mankind? All this confusion is a result from the unpredictability of the use of reproductive cloning, but human cloning is much more simpler than that. Human cloning starts with an egg from the woman's ovary. Then we remove its genes or DNA. Then we take a cell, like a skin cell, from another patient and we put its DNA in the woman's ovary. This is called nuclear transfer. Add a few chemicals and the egg starts to divide, just like a fertilized egg. After a few days, it becomes a blastocyst. If you wanted to clone a person, then you'd have to place that blastocyst in the woman's uterus. The same process was used for the famous sheep Dolly.
A Washington-based doctor is working on a groundbreaking procedure to clone a human.
Dr. Panos Zavos says he's one step away from making a clone of another person.
People that don't have eggs and sperm and they don't want to borrow their neighbor's sperm or eggs, I think that the cloning modality is a viable issue and a viable choice for them. The chapter that we want to write is to continue transferring until we get a pregnancy. This will be a lateral or a lateral-born twin.
Critics, and there are more than a few, argue the potential for abuse is there. Dr. Zavos says any new technology can be abused, and this one is in need of strong regulation. But he says he'll just concentrate on the science end.
I'm interested in treating infertility. That's it. No more, no less.
My scholarship is argue that we shouldn't impose government restrictions on IVF and similar technologies, because if we did that, we would simply be forcing the equivalent of mandatory sterilization upon infertile men and women who really can't have children in any other way, and we should reject this brave new eugenics. Now, the orthodox view of this data, there ought to be a law. The government needs to step in and regulate these technologies and perhaps even ban some of them. But certain men and women have characteristics that not only make them infertile, but also make them more likely to have children with health problems. In other words, the technology isn't to blame.
What the ulama say, and the scholars which I agree with them, that we should not indulge in such activities, because as the Quran says, do not change unnecessarily the physiology of the body. So we should not indulge in these activities unnecessarily, just for academic purposes.
And the principles of ethical medicine. As we seek to improve human life, we must always preserve human dignity. Advances in biomedical technology must never come at the expense of human conscience. It's deeply troubling to me and to most Americans. Life is a creation, not a commodity. And both forms of cloning ought to be banned for the following reasons. First, anything other than a total ban on human cloning would be unethical. Research cloning would contradict the most fundamental principle of medical ethics, that no human life should be exploited or extinguished for the benefit of another. Yet a law permitting research cloning, while forbidding the birth of a cloned child, would require the destruction of nascent human life. Secondly, anything other than a total ban on human cloning would be virtually impossible to enforce. Cloned human embryos created for research would be widely available in laboratories and embryo farms. Once cloned embryos were available, implantation would take place. Even the tightest regulations and stricting policing would not prevent or detect the birth of cloned babies. Third, the benefits of research cloning are highly speculative. Advocates of research cloning argue that stem cells obtained from cloned embryos would be injected into a genetically identical individual without risk of tissue rejection. But there is evidence based on animal studies that cells derived from cloned embryos may indeed be rejected. Yet even if research cloning were medically effective, every person who wanted to benefit would need an embryonic clone of his or her own to provide the designer tissues. This would create a massive national market for eggs and egg donors, and exploitation of women's bodies that we cannot and must not allow.
But says we shouldn't be so quick to stop reproductive cloning either.
The interesting question, I think, both philosophically and bioethically, is what if it could be made safe?
She believes cloning could eventually be as accepted as in vitro fertilization.
That's not clear to me that it is that different, to the point that we would have to say, no, we could never do that. There must be an universal, absolute, forever ban on it. Why?
That's the same question Liz is asking. She was raised a Catholic, but doesn't think twice about the possibility of cloning.
I definitely think my God would be hand in hand with me, walking down that, road with me.
After hearing the pros and cons of cloning, we come to the conclusion that human cloning can be used for the good of mankind, or it can be abused to exploit a human necessity as a commodity at an international market. Therefore, it comes back to you. What will you do with cloning?